Hello, and welcome to Historical Fiction with Kviatoslav. In addition to novels and films on historical fiction, I am also a comic book fan. In particular, I'm a Marvel comic book fan there. And one of the things I really like are comics from past ages. I was born in the 1970s, so I grew up in the 70s and 80s up until the early 90s reading comic books. But I also like older comic books from past eras because I think not only are they interesting stories, but they also give us a nice kind of window into the past to see what people were interested in and were fascinated by. And since I'm a Marvel fan, I actually like the original Marvel comics, which when it was called Timely Comics in the 1940s. And there were a number of interesting characters that were created back then, some famous ones and some less famous ones. And fortunately, Marvel in the last few years put out some compilations. You can read most of these online, but they put out some compilations of past era comics there. And I was lucky enough to pick up a few of them, and I thought I would speak about them a bit. Um, so the first collection that I've got here is from the kind of original Marvel comics. It was called Marvel Mystery Comics, which eventually became Marvel Comics. At the time, the company was called Timely Comics. And this series introduced probably two of the most famous of the, I would say, big three characters from the era there. And this collection actually covers the first four issues of Marvel Mystery Comics there. You can see the covers there. And they're really nice restorations, much better than the comics that you'll read online. And they've been restored very well and very nice and colorfully there. So you can see some excellent ones there. Overall, I think this is a nice collection. It's probably not my favorite collection there. As you can see, they were just starting to kind of find their feet with these early issues there. And they look quite different from later comics. But the very first comic introduced two of the most important characters there. The first one here being the Human Torch, who was actually an android who was originally developed by a professor there. Created to be kind of a synthetic man. And one of the problems was when he released him from his tube, he found out that exposure to air caused him to burst into flames. And it's a nice little story there. Particularly interesting is that the professor is actually relatively evil. He tries to use the Human Torch for his own purposes there. And as you can see, the artwork is not fantastic there, but you can see the Human Torch was a really interesting image. And I think with these ones in particular, it's interesting to see just the panel count compared to modern comics. You got a lot more detail in terms of the number of panels per page there. And then another character they introduced, one that they probably thought would catch on, but is not particularly well remembered here. It was called the Angel. And he's kind of a detective-like character there. So you can see him coming down in his costume. He was dressed in a costume and he had a little mustache there, which is usually more of a villain kind of visage there. But he was a character very similar to the Saint, if you're familiar with him, who was kind of a detective. He didn't really have any superpowers, but he was very good with his fists. And then we also have the second, I think, important character who went on to be revived in the 1960s, the Submariner there, Namor, the Submariner by Bill Everett. And I think this one is a really great one. The artwork for Bill Everett, you can see, is much stronger than the artwork for the other ones there. And Namor is really introduced as kind of as probably the first anti-hero, in that he declares war on the surface world, particularly the Americans there, which is kind of interesting in the time period there, that he's not afraid to deal with characters very violently. As you can see, he throws this guy out to sea there, and I think in later issues he actually murders a few characters there. I said he's a really interesting character. Although he will, in the course of these issues, will turn to the side of good at some point. It also has a few very obscure characters like the Masked Raider, who's a cowboy character who I don't find very interesting there. And it also has a Jungle Terror, which is a kind of a nondescript little standard adventure story, but also has Khazar or Khazar. I'm not sure about the pronunciation for that one. And he was actually a Pulp Fiction hero who was adapted. He's very much a Tarzan clone in that he was a small boy who was left in the woods, in this case a blonde Tarzan really. And this storyline is interesting because it is one of the few kind of continuing storylines. It starts with him as a boy being raised by his father, and yeah, growing up there. And yeah, then we get to the second issue, which continues with most of these characters. You've got the Angel, who actually got the cover. It was kind of surprising. They thought the Angel might be a more successful character than he was. But you've got the Human Torch tales there. Again, the artwork on the Human Torch tales is not particularly good there. One with this one, with him dealing with aliens. And then you've got the Angel and kind of an interesting mystery escorting this woman to Tibet there, and the Submariner continuing his war on the surface world. He's a very angry character. And it's got some zany situations like this one where he goes into a rich woman's house and he startles her and she drops her cigarette on her dress and instantly burns there until he uses water which I didn't know was a power that he had to put out the flames, and she's severely burned. I don't know if she was just walking around with her dress covered in covered in oil or something, or gasoline, that it would burst into flames like that. But then, yeah, he continues on. I say, in this one, the policemen who are trying to rescue him, he actually murders the policeman, which is not terribly heroic there. As I could say, he was very much an anti-hero. And it's also got this interesting little character called the American Ace, who is a pilot. There are a number of kind of pilot characters who were just basically airmen. And this one, the artwork in this one is just so cute, unbelievably cute, when it's showing all this death and destruction between these fictional nations. It's supposed to be, I think, something like the Spanish Civil War. And but the artwork is terribly cute. It also has text stories. The Khazar story continues until the third issue again, which has the Angel without a mustache on the cover, which is again surprising. A Human Torch story, which is nothing to write home about there. The artwork will improve on the Human Torch there. And the Angel story, which is kind of an interesting one. He basically battles against this orgy cult there of Satanists or something who are trying to sacrifice people. And I said the artwork's not great, but the story is kind of fun. And then the Prince Namor story continues. He actually meets who will eventually be his girlfriend. What's her name? Betty. I forget what her exact name is, but Betty something. And she's a police officer, and she tries to arrest him, but eventually he makes friends with her, and she basically convinces him to join the Allied cause. Remember, this is in 1939, 1940, so it was before the U.S. got involved in the war there. Again, the American Ace story continues. He's kind of an interesting one because this is basically the last panel. His story ends here. It doesn't continue until the next one. I think that he does get picked up in another comic series, but not with Timely there. Another Khazar story there. And then finally the Submariner gets the fourth issue cover. We've got another Human Torch story, which is a bit better artwork there, where he fights the Green Flame, bit better characters. And then the Angel story, he's battling this giant of a man there. Again, the Angel has no superpowers, so it's a tough challenge. And it's actually fairly rare for the characters to fight kind of supervillains. The concept of supervillains wasn't really created here, and the Namor story is basically him joining the Allies side, which is not as much fun as him declaring war on the surface world, which I thought was a lot more fun. Masked Raider, boring story, there. And then our final story I actually like quite a bit is this robot called Electro. And basically, there's this professor, I think his professor is Zog there. He's a wealthy guy who invents this robot that he can control. And he uses his wealth to recruit these men who are kind of agents. And his idea is just for them to go out and find crime and try to solve it and be able to call on the power of Electro to help them, who's Electro's a super powerhouse. And the story concerns one of the agents. He finds out about this young actress named Joyce Lovely, who's basically Shirley Temple, who gets kidnapped. And he tries to rescue her herself, but of course gets captured, which causes him to call in the professor and the Electro robot. And really, this robot going against gangsters, there's really no contest there. It's not even a fair fight. But I really like the concept of Electro. He's kind of an interesting one there. Basically he's doesn't have any agency of his own. It's the agents and the professor who are the characters there, and he's a bit like Voltron's sword, and then he comes in to save the day. And then a final tale here is of a character called the Ferret. I like the artwork on this one. He's very much just a gumshoe type of Sam Spade detective there, and I love the way that when he pulls out his gun, he yells at the characters, "Reach!" there, which I guess is kind of like a Reach for the Sky type of thing. And then you've got another Khazar story there, kind of not anything special. Overall, not bad. I think there are a few little gems in there, and they've got some covers of some of the pulp magazines in the beginning. So I think it's a really, really nice collection. I've got a number of these other series that maybe I'll talk about a bit more in the future. Thanks for listening.